Education and Behavioral Sciences section of ACRL. My name is Mary Feeney, and Jennifer Harvey and I are your EBSS members at large. Can everyone hear me? Or can anyone hear me? Good, okay. EBSS is an active group that brings together librarians to discuss common issues in education and behavioral sciences librarianship. If you're not a member of EBSS, we'd encourage you to join. In addition to hosting online discussions like the one we're having today, right now, we sponsor events at the ALA annual conferences, including programs, a research poster forum, social events, and other things. The EBSS listserv and Facebook page are also great ways to learn from and share with your colleagues. I'll list the URL for the EBSS website in the chat box, and if you want to go there later, you can learn more about what EBSS does and how you can get involved. Our current topics discussion today is thoughts on implementing the framework for information literacy for higher education. With the adoption of the new framework, questions have arisen about how it will be put into practice within particular subject areas. Our speakers today are going to share how they've been approaching this, and then after their presentations, we'll have time for questions and discussion. And I encourage you to use the chat box or your microphone. So let me introduce our speakers. Joyce Garzinski is the Communications and Development Librarian at Towson University. She teaches communication studies students about the research process, manages publicity and social media for the library, and writes grants. She's also served as the chair of the EBSS Communication Studies Committee since July 2013. Erika Raber is a research and instruction librarian at the University of Iowa Libraries. She's the liaison to the Communication Studies Department and the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. She also recently began working with the College of Education. So she's got a lot on her plate. Erika is a member of the EBSS Instruction for Educators Committee. Samantha Godby is an education librarian at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. She's also a member of the EBSS Instruction for Educators Committee, and she's vice chair of the ACRL Instruction Section's Instruction for Diverse Populations Committee. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joyce, and again, later on we'll have a chance for questions. We're also recording this session for distribution later. So over to you, Joyce. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. A little bit about me and my committee before we get started. I always like to see who's talking to me when I'm in a webinar. So on the left is a picture of me. And as Mary mentioned, I've been the chair of the ACRL EBSS Communication Studies Committee since July 2013. And over on the right is a shot of some of my wonderful committee members and some other guests on our committee's annual media tour. This was from the Downtown Project in Las Vegas just last year. So that's who I am. I'm going to talk a little bit about and provide some background on the framework and how it relates to some of the work that my committee is doing. You know, the framework was approved by the ACRL board earlier this year, and in a teeny tiny nutshell, as much as one can attempt to summarize what it's about, the new framework consists of 6 core concepts that make up information literacy, basically. The idea, as I understand it, is that students are, on this journey to try to understand these big core concepts, and that, once they, quote, get or understand these frames, and that idea is known as crossing the threshold, they become, in other words, information literate, so to say. So, it's made up of these big 6 core concepts. And this is very much a different approach than what was the information literacy competency standards for higher education. I mean, even just in the name, you kind of get a sense of how these are different ideas. So the basically, the standards were very prescriptive. They talked a lot about how, you need to be able to do these certain tasks in this certain order, but the framework really does leave open a lot more possibilities for how you get to information literacy, how you get to that destination. You know, they talk about how frames can be added. It's very much a fluid kind of process. At least that's what I get out of it. Also, you know, the framework talks more about these big ideas, I think, rather than sort of those nitty-gritty specifics that the information literacy competency standards were kind of bogged down in. I remember, I think it's in Standard 5, they talk about netiquette and all of that. And so, you know, there was a struggle with these standards that were adopted in 2000 about how to adapt them and keep them up to date for a changing mobile, you know, learning environment. And that's something, you know, that's happening quite a bit in journalism, and that, you know, we really struggle with as a committee in terms of the standards. And, you know, the framework certainly, you know, because it talks about these big ideas, it's less dated than the information literacy competency standards seem to be. Also, I think the framework has, you know, a nice recognition of students as content creators. You know, as librarians who serve journalists, you know, that's something we know and have experienced. You know, we experience all the time. But the information literacy competency standards didn't have that. And so it's nice to, you know, have this framework that recognizes what we've known all along, basically. So let me talk a little bit about subject-specific standards. There are a number of disciplines that have subject-specific standards. My committee is one of them. We have journalism standards that are based off of those information literacy competency standards. They were created by my committee and approved in 2011. And getting approval for these standards is quite the process. It takes years. I know, you know, between committee changes, membership changes, our standards took over 5 years from drafting to get that final approval. And right now, with this new framework, it's like the Wild West, essentially. Nothing has really been specified yet about, you know, what this approval process is going to look like and what needs to be included. There were pages and pages of regulations about what subject-specific standards had to include. And given sort of the environment that the standards came out of, you know, it was very prescriptive. I understand why that happened, and I'm curious to see what ends up happening on sort of a bigger level about, you know, the framework. Will it be more loose and open to interpretation? But nothing has been set yet. The standards, the subject-specific standards, are required to be revisited every 5 years. And I joined our committee on the tail end of the process to get our standards approved. And so we're required to revisit our standards again in 2016. So we have this, you know, sort of opportunity. Our standards are coming up again for this required review. And now we have this new framework. So we have had these journalism standards, and we've had a lot of struggles within our committee about what to do with these standards. You know, even after we got the document approved, we weren't quite sure what to do with it. We tried to get journalists to be more involved in the creation of the document, but we didn't, you know, get any feedback from them until after one of them found the document was online. You know, we tried and couldn't. We had difficulty getting faculty to be interested in the document. You know, our standards, it was long, it was complicated. So we tried to develop things like elevator speeches and rubrics to try to get faculty buy-in, but we still really had this difficulty. And so this new framework that's coming out, this revisiting deadline that we have, and the challenges that have been presented by our old standards are giving us this opportunity in our committee to really, revisit what information literacy for journalism students looks like. And so as a committee, we are starting to talk about and figure out, what does a framework for journalism students look like? So here is what our process is. First, we're going to start off, and we've already begun this. We're beginning by gathering students and practitioners' stuck places. So this idea of stuck places comes out of some of the literature behind the framework. We're in uncharted territory really here, and so we're developing our own process. What we do know is that, we really want this to be a useful, usable, understandable document at the end of it. And so, we are trying to start sort of from those real-world places where people get stuck, where they're encountering difficulty. So far, the committee members and I have begun by asking our own faculty on social media and on email where their students get stuck. We're hoping to get practitioner buy-in from the beginning by asking practicing journalists where they get stuck. We haven't had much success so far, but I keep plugging away at it. We're also, thinking about, and looking at other places where other disciplines have found that students and practitioners tend to get stuck, and can we adapt those stuck places to our own field? And we're also toying with the idea of, asking students where they get stuck. There's a whole can of worms with that, but it's a possibility that we may explore. And then, after we gather these stuck places, we plan to map them to the 6 frames and see what fits. And, maybe it may end up that some of our stuck places, or they tend to congregate in one frame, or, there are a lot in one frame and not too much in another. Or it may be that some of them don't fit really nice and neatly within the frames, and that we kind of have to maybe develop new frames. We're going to see where it takes us. But our plan is to map and see what happens. We also hope to then create lessons and teaching examples to address these stuck places. Since my committee members are really interested on talking about and interested in talking about teaching and how do we teach in this kind of situation. And so, we really want these to be practical and usable and understandable. So we really want to focus on how to teach to these stuck places in this document. So we're hoping that we can do that. And, the coming sandbox may be that has been talked about, may be the place where these lessons end up, or we may have something else. So we'll see what happens as these things progress. So, as we say in the TV world and journalism world, stay tuned to see what happens. But this is our process that we're developing, and we're going to go through. Hopefully, we'll have the first draft done in about a year. That's what we're hoping to do. So, thank you very much. Now I think we're going over to Erika.
Yep, sorry. Can everybody hear me, and is the volume okay? This is Erika. Okay, great, thanks. So this is the title of my session, but before I get started, and getting into the main part of my talk, I wanted to touch quickly on the live guide being developed by the EBSS Instruction for Educators Committee, and I'm still serving on that committee. Am I too loud? Somebody said I'm loud. Am I too loud? Well, I think you can control your own volume if I am. Okay, great. So the live guide is meant to be a smorgasbord of resources for librarians who provide instruction for pre-service teachers and educators. So these are based on the information literacy teacher education standards, and that's one of the subject-specific standards that Joyce mentioned. I'm going to put in a guide link here so that you can take a look at it if you'd like while I continue to talk briefly here. So that's the link to the guide. It's in the very early stages. If you look at it, you should see standards 1 and 2, and these are based on the standards, of course, rather than the framework. But you're welcome to take a look at that. At our next meeting, we will be discussing how to update our plans now that the Information Literacy Framework has been approved. And your input on what would make this a useful resource for you would be very welcome. So if you have any ideas, feel free to let me know. The focus of my talk today is on how the framework is influencing my communication and work with faculty and instructors at the University of Iowa in the College of Education. And in January 2015, as you know, the ACRL board adopted the Information Literacy Framework, and the board did not follow the advice of the task force to remove the IELTS standards document. So now the IELTS framework has been filed as one of the constellation of information literacy documents from the association. So these are some of the other types of stars in that constellation. And most of us probably know the ALA's Information Literacy Competency Standards for Higher Education from 2000 really well. The IELTS definition within the standards is, and this is a quote, a set of abilities requiring individuals to recognize when information is needed, have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. And this is the new definition of information literacy as defined within the IELTS framework. And just for the sake of time, I'll say that this definition embraces complexity, including integrated concepts. This is a quote from the IELTS framework document. Integrated concepts that are considered portals to enlarged thinking and ways of understanding information. And as Meredith Farkas pointed out, there was so much secret sauce of information literacy success that simply isn't a part of the IELTS standards. And I really liked that secret sauce addition. So Joyce already listed these. I'll just add a little bit. The frames here are presented alphabetically, not in any particular order. They're integrated core concepts. And all of these concepts can inform our conversations with faculty and instructors. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the research as inquiry frame. And for each frame, there are 2 elements that emphasize learning goals related to the frames and concepts. And I think these are helpful also to inform our conversations. So within the IELTS framework, there are lots of detailed explanations of these knowledge practices and dispositions for each frame. Knowledge practices are demonstrations of ways in which learners can increase their understanding of concepts, the practicing. Dispositions are, and this is a quote from the framework, ways in which to address the affective, attitudinal, or valuing dimension of learning. Another way to understand dispositions is to consider them as habits of mind, attitudes, and ways of looking. And I like to think of the looking in 3 different ways. And this is from Enhancing Teaching and Learning, a Leadership Guide for School Librarians by Jean Dunham. So the 3 ways of looking are looking out, and that is creative thinking. The dispositions there are open-mindedness and creativity. Looking in, reflective thinking, or metacognition and truth-seeking. Looking at, and that's critical thinking, strategic thinking, and also a healthy skepticism. So behind these knowledge practices and dispositions is a focus on student learning and activities. And I really like that. That speaks to me, and I think that can help us speak to faculty. So it's very useful in developing questions and engaging instructors in conversation. So a little bit more about my context. I'm new to working with the College of Education. I've been here since last fall. And what I'd like to see in the instruction efforts within the College of Education are some of these things here, more of a move away from undergraduate one-shots that are what we all know, the library talk or library services introductions, sometimes at the beginning of the semester. I've had to explain diplomatically why I'm not interested in doing those. A move from responding to requests and also making a call for anyone who's interested in one-shots to more strategic efforts. I also want to make sure that instructors know that instruction is more than showing how to access specific databases. And I would like more of a focus on undergraduate instruction. I know the need is there. When I talk to undergraduate students, it's obvious. So at the end of the last semester, I presented to the Admin Council and College of Education. This was the dean and the department chairs. Felt really happy to have that opportunity. And I was asked to talk about how I work with faculty, students, and staff. I also talked about my goal to map what students experience within the College of Education programs and identify strategic points of library instruction for undergrad programs. Sounds good, right? Kind of tricky. So I let them know that I would be talking with some of the chairs. There are 4 departments in the College of Education. And I'd be talking with the chairs to find out where do some of the things that librarians teach intersect with the curriculum. Where would library collaboration be most meaningful? And of course, how can we reach the most students? And that's similar to the questions that you have there on the slide. Of course, I also asked, what are the specialized information skills within education that students should develop, and what are our shared goals? So what do librarians teach that would overlap with the curriculum? And this is a new idea for my audience. So I chose the researcher's inquiry frame to start this conversation because I see this as something that really needs to be cultivated. And although all of the frames are interconnected, it seems to me that the success of the others might depend on this one. And also I see opportunities for students to work on these knowledge practices in many of the typical one-shots we have. So during my talk with the Admin Council, I explained that librarians work with students to develop their abilities to ask questions. And I also inserted a few points from other frames, in part because I know that the people I was speaking to work mostly with graduate students, but that's just an aside. And there are 4 departments, and I decided to target the Department of Teaching and Learning. And this is where I feel I can reach the most undergraduates and have the greatest impact on future teachers also. So they are going to be in that target audience, and I hope to hit my target maybe a little bit better than what you see there on the slide. So where are these intersections with the curriculum, standards, and information literacy? But here I mean, the education requirements for let's say, elementary education or the other programs within that department, and then the University of Iowa teaching standards that are mapped to all of those courses and the information literacy frames. So where do those intersect? One place they seem to intersect is a course called Technology in the Classroom that all of the majors are expected to take. And so each of the courses that the students take to fulfill their teacher certificate requirements are mapped to these teaching standards. And here they are for the Technology in the Classroom course. So here's a chance at some audience participation, because I know you're out there. Can you read this well enough to guess where information literacy instruction might be a good fit with which assignments? If you look on the right-hand side, which of these assignments might be something we could ask about? Go ahead and type it into the chat window if you're still there. Okay, I see website evaluation. That's a good one. And group inquiry. Good job. Good job. Those are the ones I pulled out too. And actually, here are the answers. There might be other opportunities as well, but these are good ones to start with. And after talking with instructors, it seems that those two assignments seem to have some really natural connections with information literacy. So thanks for participating. So with instructors, I ask questions like this. What do you see as gaps in the students' abilities and skills related to information or research? And where in your course do students have opportunities to practice these skills? I really like these straightforward questions. And these are mostly from Charbous's presentation on threshold concepts that I have listed in my last slide. And they're also similar to the stuck places that Joyce mentioned. I also ask more questions like, what kind of resources are the students using? How is the student work assessed? How is research demonstrated? Things like that. And these questions generated some interesting responses related to those two specific assignments we just highlighted. So I'm hoping that our conversation might lead to changes in the assignments themselves. So I showed you the questions I asked. I think the instructors hear something a little bit different than what I'm asking. They may not have a framework for how I might work with them in a different way. They wouldn't maybe guess that I would be able to make recommendations to modify assignments. It's difficult to do that, as you know, in working with instructors. They may not guess that I could help develop activities to provide some scaffolding for students to develop better skills to evaluate information. And this has been a challenge for me to articulate. And I need to develop and maintain some examples of what I can do and what has worked well. There always seems to be the question, what would you like to do with the class? So I'm trying to get better at answering that, because I don't necessarily want to do something with the class. I want to talk with them about student learning. And you can see these other questions that the instructors seem to ask. Where can I be inserted? When would I like to come and talk about the library? And it's tough not saying right away, I don't want to come talk about the library. So moving forward, this is where I am right now. I'm in discussions with the course supervisor and graduate instructors, trying to address these questions in a thoughtful way. And I feel like I'm making some headway, but it's really tough for a variety of reasons. The instructors are thinking about other things. The graduate instructors are moving on. There are all sorts of issues. I need to take this to a higher level, and I have taken it to a higher level, but I need to maybe maintain that level of conversation. So my plans, they include also not soliciting for one-shot sessions so that I can have more time to pursue the conversations about integrating instruction into the curriculum. And just finally here, I'll just say that I also understand that any of these successes that I might have will need continued care and feeding, which will also take a long time. So it's an awful lot of talking, but I think it's a good maybe example of how these conversations are happening, at least you'll see that here. So the last slide is a list of my references, which I think will be posted, and you can look at those later. Okay, I'm going to pass this on to Samantha. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody, can you hear me? And Erika, I think your mic's still on. I hear you typing. Okay, so hi everybody. I am Samantha Godby. I am the Education Librarian at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I've been here at UNLV for right at 2.5 years. And this is my first position as a librarian, which I think is significant to note because it means that I'm maybe less attached to the IELTS standards than some. And before this, I was a high school English teacher, and with my background as a teacher, my identity as a librarian and as a teacher are very much intertwined. And I also want to point out that I really appreciate the theoretical approach that the framework offers. I love the theoretical. I love kind of thinking through things in that way. But at the same time, I'm very practical about how I present concepts to my students. And you know, if I were to have kind of a title for my section here, it would be to do with strategic play, because I'm very excited to play around with the framework, but be strategic about how I am integrating it into my instruction. So I'm going to talk to you about my experience so far with applying this theoretical approach to my instruction. And I'm going to start with my very first experience with threshold concepts, which predates the framework. So a couple of years ago, it was the last ACRL 2013, and one of my colleagues attended a session on threshold concepts. And that affected our work with this large first-year seminar course. So you can see there's 13 sections of this Science 101, and more importantly, there were 3 sessions. We had 3 sessions with the students. So this gave us the flexibility to think about creative ways of using the time, you know, beyond our usual one-shot opportunities for instruction, where we're really just kind of trying to cram things in. And the size of the course also meant that there were 3 of us, 3 librarians working together. So it was a great chance to play our ideas off of one another. And so, as I mentioned, one of us had attended a session on threshold concepts at ACRL, and we all then read some articles about threshold concepts and were eager to give them a try in our instruction. And so for this course, we settled on a threshold concept, and this comes from one of the Hofer, Townsend, and Brunetti articles. There's a reference at the end. And we settled on this threshold concept that good searches use database structure. And this is something that proficient searchers have in mind automatically, no matter what kind of search they're doing, whether they're searching for shoes or for a journal article. So we guided students through activities that drew their attention to the structure of databases in both informal ones you can see here in the picture. We took them through Zappos, IMDb, as well as more scholarly databases. And notice also that we were very explicitly teaching a threshold concept, but we packaged it in less intimidating, more approachable language for the students. And I wanted to make sure to mention this, this experience because this helped me be enthusiastic about the framework when it was proposed. And I don't at all view the framework as antithetical to the standards. I think as Joyce mentioned this as well, they serve different purposes. And like I said already, maybe it's my background as a teacher, but I appreciate theoretical frameworks. I really appreciate the opportunity to view things through different lenses and to prompt me to rethink what I'm doing, because I think it's so easy, especially in the the one-shot lessons that so many of us do. It's so easy to focus on the nuts and bolts of strategies and tasks, which the standards really kind of highlighted before. And so in terms of education, This year, I've been thinking with the advent of the framework, thinking about threshold concepts and these particular frames in terms of my instruction that I do with our College of Education first-year seminar. And this is a smaller course, it's just me, and I only have 50 minutes with the students. And I have to cover a combination of what the instructors want and what we, the library, want. So I'm expected in those 50 minutes to go over the information cycle, to help students understand the differences between popular and scholarly materials, and also teach them all about finding stuff. Also just want to mention that when I refer to, so the finding stuff is really what the instructors want, and the others come from the library side, and this is a result of curriculum mapping that we did as a department to help us determine who would focus what we would focus on in the first-year seminars, as opposed to the large freshman composition course that freshmen take, and then also ideally what we would cover in the different stages of a student's career over the 4 years of their education. And so when I think about these in terms of the framework, there are a number of frames that could fit into any of these. So looking at just the first one, the information cycle, you can talk about that in terms of information creation as a process, information has value, or scholarship as conversation. And I'm sure you could kind of finagle others as well, but these are, to me, the most natural fits. And so if you're trying to think about your instruction in terms of the frames, you can't possibly cover all of this. So asking the question, so how do I focus my instruction? And so what I did this semester is I looked for overlap and thought about my priorities, and I settled on these 2 frames to emphasize. And so I knew that I would likely touch on other frames like scholarship as conversation, as I'm talking about scholarly, the characteristics of scholarly sources, but those other frames would not be my focus. And I mentioned this idea of strategic play. For me, what that looks like, the way I like to be strategic with my instruction, is with very explicit, measurable learning outcomes. And the measurable comes into play with assessment and kind of tying those 2 things together. And down at the bottom, related to this, I have some recommended reading. This is a blog post that just came out last month, obviously, which points out how in the later drafts of the framework, and the one that we've settled on, there's an emphasis on the work of Wiggins and McTeague and this idea of backwards design. And that's how I work. I start with my learning outcomes and I work backwards. I think about where I want students to be, what I want them to learn, and I think about ways that I can get them there and ways that I can assess, ways that I can check in along the way to make sure I'm helping them in the ways that I hope I am. And actually, with this, something I'm planning to try next week in my final instruction session for this semester, but next semester for sure, is actually sharing the learning outcomes before the one-shot lesson. And so this would be kind of a mini flipping exercise where I can be explicit about this to students in advance of the lesson. And this has come up already, but this question is, so where do we get those learning outcomes? There's lots of places to draw from, obviously. The standards, there's discipline-specific standards, you've got departmental and institutional outcomes. I do really like the framework and the knowledge practices and dispositions because with your learning outcomes, you are wanting to articulate behaviors and attitudes that learners will have as a result of your instruction. And the knowledge practices are actually really quite helpful in giving you a draft of some of those ideas. So I have here some examples. So if in my instruction this semester, I was focusing for this course on information creation as a process, these are some examples of knowledge practices and dispositions that I can manipulate to fit my students, to fit these specific questions that a particular course instructor might have. So a knowledge practice that you might work with would be that a learner would be able to articulate the capabilities and constraints of information developed through various creation processes. So for this, I did, related to the information cycle, I gave students samples of different kinds of sources related to the same event. So we were looking at the Michael Brown shooting, and I gave a tweet and a scholarly article and a documentary film and a newspaper article and a magazine article, and we talked about the different constraints of those and how it's related to how they were created. And I also want to mention the dispositions. I think these are very helpful in identifying that affective domain, which I think is important, especially with these threshold concepts that can be very tricky. And as I said, I like to pair assessment. So there are loads of classroom assessment techniques. These are a few that I use. So brainstorming, using either a Padlet wall or a piece of paper or the whiteboard in the classroom, having students brainstorm in a place that I can see it and get a sense of where they are. 1-minute papers, polling, even very simple polling from, how clear are you on this concept, from a thumbs down, anywhere from thumbs down to thumbs up, and anywhere in between. Those are the ways that I can check in with students because these are very much tied to my learning outcomes so that I can see where they are along the way and how I can adjust my instruction along the way. And this is my last slide. This is a diagram from Sylvia Liu, and I think that it does an amazing job of illustrating how messy threshold concepts are. And I wanted to end on this because I think many of us tend to think of the threshold of a threshold concept as like a doorway that you step through and you've arrived. And the threshold can be, it's this liminal space. It can take a while. You can linger in there. You can leave. You can backtrack. And it looks different for different people, and it looks different for the same person with different threshold concepts. And so I think this highlights kind of how messy they can be and how important it is for us to really think about both the cognitive and the affective domains as students kind of interact with these troublesome concepts, and also the importance of assessing along the way to see where students are. So this is my final slide, the final one, with some of those references so that you can read it. I realize I will also share in the chat a URL. My colleagues and I did a workshop at ACRL this year, kind of taking people through this backwards design process, starting with threshold concepts, starting with the frames, and there are some resources there to help with doing the different parts of that process. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much to Samantha, Erika, and Joyce. You've really given us all a lot to think about for our own work, and also maybe some things that EBSS could pursue. I'd like to open it up. We have almost 15 minutes, about 15 minutes, to our participants to see, our attendees to see if they, want to add their own ideas, have questions for our speakers. It might be easiest to use the chat box because if we have everyone unmuting their mics, that might be a little harder to manage. But please, down there in the chat box, your own ideas, your thoughts on this and questions for the speakers. Any questions for our speakers? Oh, good, you're typing. Okay. So we have a question there. I don't know if, you know, Joyce, Erika, Samantha, if any of you want to jump in, or if other attendees want to jump in on that as well.
There are in that link that I put in the chat box. We transcribed the products of the workshop that we did, and there are quite a lot of learning outcomes that give some examples of things that people are playing around with related to the different frames. We have it divided up by frame as well.
Okay, we have another question there from Nathan.
I'll go ahead and answer the question. I think it's from Janine asking about how they there were things that the instructors asked for us to do and the library side. They've been pretty receptive to it. They want to make sure, you know, they have their things they want to make sure to get covered, and, you know, it's a give and take, you know, and it's helpful, as I say, that certain topics or ideas are things that I'm making an effort to cover in all of the sections of the class, because we have about 7 sections and there are 5 different instructors. So it's helpful to say that this is something I'm really trying to give all of the students in this course, but it is definitely, you know, a conversation, and I haven't had trouble with that so far.
This is Erika. I'll make an attempt at answering Nathan's question. That's a really good question because, you know, whether the outcomes are institutional or all those requirements that are placed on the departments and the programs are enabling us to work with the framework and our information literacy instruction. And I'm not sure, but it seems to me that in a way it might make it more challenging because the information literacy pieces are not visible. They don't jump out. You know, if you look at the listing of all of those, in the case of the pre-service teachers, look at those teacher requirements, you know, the teaching standards. Information literacy just isn't there. And I kind of feel like it should be. That should be an important piece of that. So maybe we should even go to a higher level and work with the people who are developing those standards. That's just one take on your question. But boy, there are a whole lot of pieces there. I'm hopeful that there's room for the information literacy discussion. So that's my answer.
This is Joyce, and I'd like to talk a little bit about Nathan's question as well. I think a lot of it has to do with how you approach the framework. I think if you, or at least, you know, at my institution and working with my committee members, there's a lot of focus on the how do we enhance student learning and being able to demonstrate that we make an impact on student learning. And I think by, if we can figure out those places where students get stuck in the learning process and develop ways to help them overcome those stuck places through our instruction, and demonstrate that they have moved past those stuck places, I think we really are, the framework can really help us get to those outcomes and be able to demonstrate our value in an assessment context.
There's a comment and question there from Barb, if any of you want to address that, about the importance of helping future teachers understand information literacy, and how can we help future teachers?
I can illustrate.
Go ahead with that, Samantha.
This is Erika.
Erika.
Sorry. I'll take another stab at that for Barb. Hi, Barb. Well, that's very dear to my heart, at least having teachers understand how to work with school librarians. And, of course, there are so few school librarians in Iowa. It's increasingly difficult to have the funding for that and the support for that. I have mixed feelings about helping them teach like librarians. I'd like to make them advocates to have more librarians because I think there's a real role to have both, and I'm sure you would agree with that. But in the case that there are fewer librarians, yes, it'd be great to get them to that point. That would be wonderful. I'm just trying to get them to the, a level that I'm comfortable with when they actually graduate, which will not be at the school librarian level, at least not yet.
One thing that we do at UNLV is we host, this year we're going to be hosting our third K12 Institute. So it's a teacher, the full name is something more complex, like the Teacher Librarian Institute for the Integration of Research into the Curriculum. But we have a 3-day workshop, 3-day institute where we bring we provide stipends and bring teacher librarian and teacher pairs. So it's pairs of a teacher and a librarian from a school to come and have devoted time working on integrating research-based assignments into their curriculum. And so I think as much as we can provide opportunities like that, so I think there's both the work that we do within colleges of education, working with the students who are going to be teachers in the future, but also as much as we can work with the people who are, the in-service teachers right now, the people who are out in the field, and giving them the space and the opportunity to work with librarians to do that work. I think that can be really valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's we have two more comments and questions there that I want to make sure we can get to. Nathan, following up on the earlier discussion, you can see his question there. If anyone wants to follow up on that, and then we have another one after that.
This is Erika. I guess if I understand your question correctly, I would say there definitely is a need for kind of a move from the skills to more process-based instruction, or finding a better balance. I think in our conversations, it seems the instructors and faculty always look to me as someone who can provide some skills instruction. And so I think we could both do a lot of work to rethink our instruction so that it is more process or conceptual based.
And I think one way of doing that is to get some of those skills-based things out of the instruction and into tutorials or some other way of providing that, so that the actual time with the librarian can be more on the conceptual, deeper level, and putting those things into practice at the same time.
Great. Okay, so we have a comment and question there from Karen. You know, is there a problem with terminology for different disciplines within the framework? That's a good question.
I think that, you know, if you look through the framework, there are a lot of very, I don't want to say it's jargony, but I mean, there's a lot of high-level concepts that are probably going to need explaining or clarifying for audiences that are not, you know, in our discipline. But I think, you know, that's important for us to be able to do. I know from our standards, that was something that our journalism standards we really struggled with, was that, you know, we tried very much so to, you know, explain everything, to, you know, lay it all out. And what ended up happening was, you know, it became a document that lived on, it wasn't living, it sat on a shelf. And so I think we need to kind of get away from, I guess, talking about sort of the nuances of, you know, is this the right word, you know, to describe what it is, but rather start thinking about how are we going to communicate these ideas to our students, to our faculty. How are we going to translate these for a lay audience?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does this really mean? And, you know, how can we make this these big ideas practical within our disciplines? What does it mean to implement these things?
You know, Joyce, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's almost like, you know, I don't want to say it doesn't matter what it says in the framework, but it's our job to sort of take that and translate it, knowing the faculty and students we work with and the disciplines, into the way they're going to understand it. So it still might have the same meaning and impact, but it's not, you know, coming from the librarian terminology.
I would just echo that too. That, you know, when I say I was using the framework to start those conversations, I didn't, you know, pull out the document or use that exact language. It's using that document to kind of ask questions and figure out how they talk about the things we all talk about, you know, what we want our students to do, to learn, how we want our students to engage with material. Those are the types of questions, and then we find out what the language they use.
Yeah. And then I think we have one more comment there from Barb about teacher candidates can't always articulate their own information needs. Trying to read through this. Oh boy, we have a couple more questions. Sorry, I didn't scroll all the way down in the chat box there. Let's see. Does anyone want to take a stab here at Nathan's other comment? Curious to hear someone address the tendency to be selectional in focusing. In our last minute that we have, or as Nathan suggests, perhaps for future conversation.
Well, I will say that it's definitely something for future conversation and not something we can squeeze into a minute.
Yes.
But that I do think that it is, these are big ideas, and that's kind of the point, is to step away from, you know, the very specific standards and to have some big ideas. And if you're going to then go back and implement, you do have to focus or, extract or, however you want to put it, like to be selective about what aspects you focus on. I think it's just that like kind of inherent kind of push and pull, as we figure out what we can do, what we can accomplish. But I think having these sets of large ideas to foster discussions like this one is very valuable and can be a valuable tool for us rethinking what we do so that we're not just redoing exactly the same thing that we do semester after semester, year after year.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on, Samantha. And I want to thank all three of you, our speakers again. This has really been just a great conversation. I also want to thank Alois and Allison from ACRL who've been supporting us with using WebEx for this presentation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's being recorded, and we will be sending it out to the EBSS list once it's available, and feel free to widely distribute it if you'd like to share it with others. And if you have suggestions for future current topic discussions, Jennifer and I would love to hear about that. I posted our contact information down there in the chat box, and of course you can also look on the EBSS site to find us. So thanks again. Thank you to our speakers.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for facilitating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.